the founder of Zionism, Theodor Herzl, published his book called The Jewish State. Why is that important? Because it was his ideology that is being carried on by the Israeli Zionists, starting with the first head of state, David Ben-Gurion, to the current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. So what was the ideology? In his book, Herzl lays out the plan. He says that now this is long before the Holocaust, the very tragic loss of 6 million Jews in Europe in the Holocaust. That happened in Second World War. But I'm talking about 1896. Now, the language that he uses, Herzl, he says we will drive out the Palestinians from Palestine. First, gently persuade them to leave. And then if we have to use force, we will. Okay. Then if we go from there, in that book, he also uses the words, this state will be a European fortification or rampart against Oriental barbarism. I think the language is very important because the current Zionist leadership is using this kind of language. Subhuman, Palestinians are subhuman, that language. So the state itself is visualized as a European state in the Middle East and as a defense against barbarism. Now, I'm cutting it out and moving on to 1947. I mentioned 17, which is Balfour Declaration. I won't have time to go into that, but that is the basis of the state of Israel. What happened in 1947 is the UN partition plan. And in 1948, Israel was created as a state. Ben-Gurion said at that time, echoing the founder of Zionism, these are very important words, and I think most people don't know about this history. He said he will accept what the UN is giving, which is 53% of Palestine, to Israel. Accept it as a down payment on the rest of Palestine. He goes on to say, we, Israelis, will have a very strong army and we will dissolve the partition. Imagine that the UN and the respect that he has for the United Nations will dissolve the partition. Now there's no change. That policy has remained the same. And so what you see in Gaza today is the culmination of that plan. And this is the last resistance that you have left among the Palestinians to stand up against such a huge power, backed by other colonial powers like France, Britain, and now the superpower, the US. Unfortunately, Canada is a part of it. And so we have just a tiny resistance left. If Hamas were to surrender, there will be no Palestine. So this is the situation right now. And as you mentioned, close to 8,000 people have been killed, Palestinians have been killed. And we should know that 2,000 are children, over 2,000 are children.
Correct.
Now, and 1/3 of the homes destroyed. Now, this is a textbook definition of genocide. And I want to read to you, for your viewers also, I don't have time to read, I want to mention to you that the historians and Jewish scholars are calling it a textbook case of genocide, and they are calling on Israel to have not just ceasefire is the wrong word, to stop massacring Palestinians. So ceasefire is really actually at this time the wrong word, because it's only one side that is continuing.
Yeah, it's not like both sides have an option. So, but just for the sake of argument, my question is, what objective did Hamas have for the recent attack that they carried? They knew that they were instigating a might that was much more powerful than them, and the retaliation would have very dire consequences. So it seems like, from what you are saying, that they just kind of played into the hands of Israel and accelerated the process in doing so.
That's a very important question, and I ask that question to myself all the time. And when I discuss it with other scholars and colleagues, we talk about that. Now, my question, my answer is, what choice did Hamas have? Okay, they took this action. This is a very desperate action and almost sure that the might of Israel will crush them. So they killed, unfortunately, of course, there are over 1,200 Israelis. And now they have already, they've lost 6,000.
Exactly.
So this is not really something that they sat down, Hamas, and said, well, we have a choice. Now, Israel had a choice to exercise restraint in self-defense. And Hamas, the choice was simply to continue suffering under the siege. Now, the siege started in 2006. That was an act of war. There have been other assaults by Israel on Gaza, you know that, 3-4 times, 2012, 14, so on. But this is the most devastating, and I think Netanyahu has made it clear that he said it is going to reverberate in history. I don't want to get away from your question. Coming back to your question, why did Hamas do it knowing the mighty power will crush them? I think Chris Hedges gives a very good answer. I will quote his words. He said, the Hamas fighters who went into Israel to launch their attack, they knew that they will be killed. So they had a choice in choosing how to die, because they had no choice how to live. Their life had been made so miserable, and their families, children, facilities, that they chose a desperate act. When you have somebody cornered, they are so desperate, they are drawing the attention of the world to their continued state of existence. This is my perception of why they launched it.
So just taking off of this, like you said, the siege has been ongoing since 2006, 2007. So if Hamas had let status quo, or if it had maintained status quo, things would still be what they had been since 2006? Or do you think that the recent election of an extremely right-wing government had made things even worse for them, and it's a consequence of that?
It is very likely, because whenever there is an election, it's always speeding up of tensions and expectations, or sometimes based on who might be the next leader. If you remember, in his second bid for being elected Netanyahu was trailing behind
Yeah.
the last election. I'm talking about is
Yeah.
then he made a statement that if he is re-elected, he will never allow the state of Palestine to come into being. And he was elected.
Yeah.
That was his platform. So I think Hamas knows pretty well what the consequences will be. Now, the president of Israel, I thought he was a better, more balanced individual. I think of Netanyahu as a cartoon character, sorry. And he is actually, in my view, to me, he is worse than Hitler. I don't want to go into that. But even the president of Israel has said, we make no distinction between civilians and Hamas fighters. Now, what kind of language is that? No difference. So go on killing everyone indiscriminately. That's what they're doing. So Hamas definitely had certain calculations in their mind, but the bottom line is that they wanted to draw the world's attention to that state. The status quo was no longer acceptable to them. And we should all know that resistance is allowed in international law against occupying forces. And Israel is an occupying force. Now, whenever I am asked that question, if Hamas had not done that, the continuation of status quo was not acceptable. Nothing was being done. Why? Because the US has monopolized the peace process, and Hamas knows that the US is not going to change unless there's a lot of pressure. So Hamas is counting on us, American people, voters, to make our leadership responsible for what they're doing. I think the last straw that Hamas had was Israel's election of the ultra right-wing people, and they thought that was the end of their hope. As you mentioned, there's definitely connection between that. So this re-election of Netanyahu was the end of their hope.
So also, what about the hostage situation? Do you think that Hamas thinks that they have any leverage in determining the turn of events by holding on to those hostages or using them as a bargaining chip?
I think it was very good that the two hostages released with the help of Red Cross by Hamas. They said that they were treated very humanely.
Yeah.
Because they were not in good health. The Hamas leadership, they returned them. Now, if the Israeli government were more humane or concerned about humanitarian angles, they would appreciate it. But in this mood that you have this government, Israeli government, I don't think it will affect them. Hamas can be as gentle as they want. However, the international community is watching it, and I am noticing a little shift in some European leadership and awareness among the Middle Eastern and the Southern globe. It is a global struggle now. I think Palestine has become one of the four major global issues. Black Lives Matter, gender justice, and then one of the climate change, and this Palestine has risen to that level. So I think Hamas has succeeded